Good morning, conference goers, and welcome to this session, which we've entitled New Developments in Co-Production. My name's Derek Munn, and I'm the Director of Policy and Public Affairs at the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists. Here's a housekeeping slide, which may be familiar if you were in James's keynote session earlier. I suspect that by the end of the 2 days, you'll be able to recite it, but we are enjoined to read it out at the beginning of every session. So, for those of you joining for your first session, there's a chat tab and a questions tab. If you put a question in the chat tab, I won't see it and it won't get answered. So questions tab for questions, chat tab for comments. Obviously, we're speech and language therapists. We're going to treat each other with respect, and the chat will be monitored. Everything's being recorded, and I think it's available for 6 months. So there is time to come back. And we'll also be able to deal with Q&A after the session too, if we don't have time to deal with everything. There is also, and now we're getting into areas of tech which may be beyond me, a feedback tab for star rating and comments, which will help us. And I'm, again, enjoined to tell you that you can earn points, which I'm sure will be an excitement to all of you, both by feeding back and commenting, and also with the secret code, which will show up at the end of the session. So I'm sure you'll all be looking forward to that. Let's move on with co-production. I just want to kick off by reminding you what's in the Royal College's vision relating to co-production. And I know the term co-production gets used in lots of different settings, but we're using this to mean work with people with lived experience of speech, language, communication, eating, drinking and swallowing, communication challenges and barriers, and the organisations that represent them. And we've worked over recent years to try and embed co-production effectively in all aspects of the Royal College's work, whether it's work in guidance, whether it's work in research, whether it's work in political influencing. But what we wanted to do today was just hear some innovative and interesting new developments that are underway. This isn't part of the scientific programme, this isn't QA'd research. These are members who've come in and said, look, we're doing something really interesting and we think colleagues would like to hear about it. And we at the Royal College agreed. So, first of all, I'm delighted to welcome Kirsten Howells from STAMR. She'll introduce herself and take it away, Kirsten.
Thank you very much, Derek. Yes, so I'm Kirsten. I'm a speech and language therapist and I'm Deputy Chief Exec at STAMR, the National Stammering Charity. And today I'm going to tell you briefly about a co-production project we've done around disclosure. So we started a working group to consider whether STAMR should have anything to say or any resources to share around disclosure. And the reason we started a project is because some of the staff and volunteers in the organisation weren't quite sure about the kind of vibe around disclosure that we saw online. So we saw a lot of disclosure is the key, just disclose it, it'll all be fine. And we just weren't sure whether that was right or not, or whether STAMR should say anything about that. So we wanted to think about that. So in our working group, we have an SLT who STAMRs, that's me. And we have 3 other people who STAMR. We have a cabin crew manager who STAMRs, a community company founder who STAMRs, and an artist and engineer who STAMRs. So those are the people in the group. So what we did, and Astra, lovely if you can flip to the next slide. What we did was we read the research around disclosure, particularly around disclosure about stammering. We discussed our own experiences around disclosure a lot, and we did lots of interviews with people who STAMR outside of the working group to explore their experiences of disclosure. And just to be really clear, we define disclosure as a kind of a deliberate act of sharing some information, and that sharing might be, or that information might be the fact that you stammer, or it might be something about your stammering, or it might be something about the way you wanted the other person, the conversation, to respond. But it was a conscious sharing of that information. So all of this, like we read the research, we did the interviews, we talked, I mean, endlessly for months, this all took months, was we came up with a framework, which we called the tell, the throw and the catch. I'm going to very briefly talk you through that framework in the next 10 minutes. So can we go to the next slide, please, Astra? So it's divided into the three parts, the tell, the throw and the catch. And we've conceptualized the tell as a ball. So the tell is the what. It's what is the information that you want to convey, that you want the other person to know. So it's really important to think about what's the purpose of that? What's the aim? What are you trying to get out of this act of sharing information? What would be helpful to you? And that this might vary lots from person to person and from situation to situation. So if we go to the next slide, we've got just a few examples. No, we don't have examples of the tell. I thought we did. Have we missed out a slide? Okay, I'm just going to read out a few examples of tells very briefly. I'm going to look left on my other screen because I've got them here. So from the interviews, we just pulled out a few examples. So here we've got 3 examples. When I'm lecturing, I like to tell my students that I stammer because it breaks down barriers and I want to try and stop people finishing my sentences. So we had something about the purpose and the information the person wanted to convey that. Someone else told us I always disclose my stammer at job interviews. I prefer to control my narrative by briefly explaining why I speak the way I do. And another one of the interviewees said, when I meet new people, I want them to know that I stammer. It makes me less panicked and it kind of keeps me honest, helps me show the world the version of me that I want to show. So they were just some examples of the tell, the sorts of information that people wanted to convey. Now we're going to jump to the throw. So that's the next bit of the framework. So the throw is about how you throw that ball, but in what manner are you going to convey that information? And there are lots of different ways to do that. So if we go to the next slide, it's got some lovely pictures. Oh, there's the examples of the tell. Let's skip over those now. So looking at examples of the throw, we've got in the first picture, this is just like a kind of a standard verbal throw. We've got somebody throwing their ball of information. We've also got towards the top right, a sort of paper plane in the same colours as the ball. So that might be someone this is a written act of disclosure. So maybe that's an email where someone has written down the information and conveyed it to somebody else in that way. On the bottom left, we've got another little paper plane, but this one, rather than the whole thing being the ball of information, that ball of information is just a little part of this process. So it might be where somebody has filled in a staff survey or filled in an EDI form or something like that. So they've conveyed it as part of a larger whole. On the bottom right, we've got 2 people passing the ball back and forth between them. So that might be in a real heart-to-heart, a longer discussion around this disclosure. And in the middle, we've got somebody who is wearing a ball costume. They have become the ball. So they're not telling, they're showing that act of disclosure. So to give you some examples of those throws from our interviews, have we got the next slide, Astra? I'm going to read them out from the screen. I bet they've just come up in a different order. So just some examples of the throw from our interviews. One of the respondents told us, I tend to drop it into conversation somewhere, maybe using something else to lead in and then saying, I'm having a bad day today. So we class that almost like as a sideways throw, like someone sort of chucking the ball a little bit sideways, or a bit of a Columbo moment. Somebody's leaving the room and they just mention it on the way out. We had another one of those. Somebody said, in casual situations, I'll try to sneak it in when it's relevant. Like if someone asked me, how was your presentation? I say something like, it went well, although it was quite tiring because of my stammer. Somebody else said, we did a session on Disability History Month and I invited some of my friends to come to that. My friends hear how I speak, but we'd never ever discussed it before. Stammering was talked about in that session. And someone else saying, I always have the fact that I have a stammer on my CV. because I'd rather be open and upfront about it. So that CV one is a good example of the paper plane with a little ball on it. They disclosed as part of a bigger whole. So that we've done the tell, we've done the throw, and now briefly coming on to the catch. So the catch is the other person's response. And what we found from our interviews and those discussions of our own experience is that some people are better at catching than others. And catching is likely to be a skill that can improve with practice. But something really important from the point of view of the disclosure is that you can't control the catch. It's completely out of your hands. And if we flip to the next slide, we just have, I'm not going to talk through any examples here, but just we were able to group from our interviews catches into, we had examples of good catches. We also had examples of fumbled catches, so where a catcher didn't see the throw coming and sort of got smacked in the face by it, or it just sailed past them. They didn't even notice. Or we had examples of catchers who seemed to know that something important had been said, but they didn't really know what to do with that. They weren't ready for it. So they sort of, like, the ball was at their feet and they were panicking. And then we also had bad catches. So we had catches where the catcher battered it away. And we even had examples that we called the stomp, where somebody responded really, really negative towards that act of disclosure. So we had this huge array of quality of catches. So I'm going to finish up with just 2 more slides talking about kind of what our working group's conclusions were. So when we're thinking about, for people who stammer, or this could be, I mean, obviously what we've done is thinking about stammering, but I think the beauty of the tell, the throw and the catch is you can apply it to almost anything, like you can apply it to anything. So we're talking about stammering, but you can obviously imagine it in all sorts of contexts. Our working group's conclusions were a little bit contrary to what we felt was that online kind of vibe around disclosure. We thought that we didn't think that disclosure was a no-brainer. So our thoughts around for individuals who might be exploring disclosure was that being deliberately open can be really useful, and there's certainly a lot of research evidence around that. The reality we found was that individual choices around whether to disclose, when to disclose, and what to disclose vary enormously. That it's worth celebrating it when you get the catch that you want, but it's important and valuable to know that it doesn't always go the way you hope, and that you can control the tell and the throw, but the catch is quite literally out of your hands. And also it's worth bearing in mind the perspective of the catcher. Catching is hard to do well. Catchers haven't spent 2 weeks leading up to this moment. They're doing something else and a ball suddenly comes sailing through the air. So being aware of that. And just moving to the final slide, which is our kind of thoughts for speech and language therapists working with clients and service users. We felt that a really key thing was that it's about informed choice and understanding not only the benefits of disclosure, but understanding the risks, understanding that fumbled and bad catches do happen. But that using the tell, the throw and the catch as a way to think about it, it can offer people a way to think about the tell in more detail, experiment with different methods of throwing, and relieve them of the burden of responsibility or shame when a catch goes wrong. And that as therapists, by letting people know about the actually very likely possibility of fumbled or even bad catches, we give them a better opportunity to both prepare for that and to recover from them more easily, rather than carrying that as a personal failure when it doesn't go to plan. And that for those of us who work with children, maybe we can help parents learn how to throw, so they're actually modelling self-advocacy tools to their children from early on. And that is me done like 30 seconds before time. Thank you very much.
Kirsten, thank you so much. When I first saw your model, I thought this is absolutely fascinating, and I'm sure other colleagues will agree. And I look forward to comments and questions coming in. But moving quickly on to another topic which immediately caught my attention, and I'd like to hand over to the team from Born at the Right Time and the Northern Care Alliance to take us through their work.
Thank you, Derek. So my name's Lucy Oliver. I'm the school's clinical lead for Bury Paediatric Services, which is part of a larger organisation of Northern Care Alliance. So we're made up of four care organisations and part of the wider Greater Manchester Combined Authority. And we've kind of come today to present with Jo from Born at the Right Time. We had a local SEND inspection about 18 months ago, which was kind of the trigger for change and the reason why this collaboration came about. And there were several areas identified in this local area inspection, but speech and language therapy was named as one of them, specifically for the long wait for the initial assessment and also sort of more generally widespread across different professions that some of the advice these young people were getting was too generic and not tailored enough towards them specifically. So there was an identified need for sort of organisational change, and one of those that came out of this for our service was working with Born at the Right Time to implement and sort of identify some of those changes needed. So I'll hand over to Jo for the next bit to talk about what she came and did with us.
Okay, thank you. So that you could move on to the next slide. Thank you. Okay, so I'll tell you a little bit, very briefly about me and a little bit about Born at the Right Time. So I'm Jo. I was a speech and language therapist. I'm not currently registered with HCPC, but I'm still a Royal College member. And I'm the parent of a child with complex disabilities. And I work for a small organisation called Born at the Right Time. And we do three main things. We aim to support parents, train professionals and practitioners, and influence policymakers. And all our work is rooted in lived experience. We were founded by Rachel, who is a nurse, and I work there as a former speech and language therapist. So we both have experience from kind of both sides of the bed, although I never actually worked with anybody in bed in my career. And we are also informed by research. So what you didn't see, I think, was the opening slide to the presentation, which was some feedback from the course that we did in Bury, which is the title of this presentation is Not Just Service Bashing. So while we do share our lived experience, we deliver things that are informed on research and we build up to real world solutions for organisations that can really move forward, which I think is what we've managed to do with Bury. So if you could move on to the next slide, please. Okay, I'm looking at the wrong place because I'm looking at my slides as well. Okay, so there's a slide, course content. I think we've missed a slide maybe between those. Oh, I didn't notice that when we went through earlier. So after the Born at the Right Time slide, there's a course content slide. No, okay, I'll tell you anyway. So we delivered a course all about the lived experience of families. We share perspectives and things informed by research. We look at what's underneath the surface for families. We explore the research and evidence around areas like conflict, trauma, and trust. I encourage people to think about bias and entrenched thinking. And then we look at action planning and what are the little things that make a big difference. And I'm really excited to hand over now back to Claire and Lucy so they can tell you what some of those little things are and big things.
Thanks, Jo. So I think the next slide might have to go back. It's embedding practice. What following on from the course, we sort of as a team developed some action plans with Jo and Rachel there. And Claire will go into some more details about the practical examples of what we've done so far. But we then also had a smaller meeting with myself and Claire and Kirsten to sort of review the action plan and see kind of how things were going and how to sort of move them forward. And our action plan, which was individual to our service, focused on being an easy access service, so trying to remove sort of barriers for people being able to get in touch. We're focused around EDI, we're focused around being a responsive service, not just to the children on the caseload, but to people, health professionals, parents who had questions. And then we also looked at having easily accessible information for everyone involved with the service. And I think it's really important to highlight that sort of the key points around this action plan were that it was very practical to implement. So we embedded this action plan with things that we are already doing as a service. So using the risk matrix, using care aims, looking at service transformation with the balance system. And then the sort of second thing to highlight is that we embedded this action plan within our sort of improvement plan as a whole service. So we come back to it regularly at team meetings. We've had meetings with Joe about it. And the kind of action plan almost sort of took two directions. So we had some really quick wins that we could implement straight away. And then we've also got some longer term actions that are still ongoing, that have been sort of taken over by subgroups within our team, that we're still sort of working on now. But I'll hand over to Claire, who's going to go through some actual practical examples of what we've done so far.
Thank you, Lucy. Next slide, please. So these are some practical examples of changes we made following the session with Born at the Right Time. So all of our team are more likely to use parents' actual names now instead of calling them mum or dad. We do audit that as a service as well. So we look at the case notes and we can see very clearly, are parents being referred to as mum, or is their name written down there? We've changed some of the terminology we use. So, for example, we used to write our targets as care plans. We now call them our plans, but it's more than just a change of name. It's a change of the ethos around the support we're offering. So we're making it very clear what our role is, what things the parent feels able to do at that time, and then what things maybe the school or the nursery setting will be doing. And it's a plan that we put together. We've improved our documents so they're easier to read. We're more accessible by the phone. We've now finished a child-friendly survey so we can gather feedback more easily from children. And our pathways, and I'm going to say actually, we've kind of moved away from the word pathways. I would just say the support that we offer is more tailored around what the family needs at that time, rather than we do an assessment looking for something and then we would put a plan in place. We'll more be getting to the bottom of what actually does the family need at that time. So next slide, please. So our key takeaways. So I think a really big one that we reflected on is that around communication, we're communication professionals. How we communicate with our families or our service users is just as important as supporting their communication or supporting others to communicate. And I think we can all reflect on that. Are we communicating in an accessible way? And just think about those principles. So we've had a shift in thinking as a service. So now when we're working with families, we are thinking, what support do you need from us? And then how can we use our specialist knowledge and expertise to help you get to that point? But really making sure the outcome is something meaningful for the family and for the child. We're open and honest about expectations. I think it's really important to be honest if there's going to be a long wait for something, to be honest about what you can and can't do within your remit as a professional, and that really supports those working relationships with families. And then, as Lucy said, we've got longer term projects going on, so we're going to be doing some focus groups with families from the communities in Bury, finding out how we can better support them going forwards. And I think I'm just going to hand back briefly to Joe, and then that's us.
So just a quick recap of who we are and what the work has been. I don't ever get bored of listening to those two talk about the changes that they've put in place. And I know they talk about how hearing lived experience was so important in building those strategies, and also the whole team having heard that, so they knew the importance of implementing it. If you want to get in touch with any of us, the details are there, but you can also do that through the networking facilities that Royal College have provided. So I'm happy to keep in touch, and I know the others are too. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the team. The diversity of speech and language therapy is one of the things which is constantly exciting to me. And having begun with Stammer and moved on to Children's Services, I'm pleased to say that we're now going to have our third presentation in the area of Down syndrome. And Leila, over to you.
Sorry, next slide, video 1, please.
Lila Bergsik, a speech and language therapist, Samuel Brackett, future scientist researcher. Speech therapy is to protect children that can play with the toys and make stuff and do whatever they like. Speech therapy for babies and kids is so we can all do things together. Sam and Leah are making presentation, and Sam will appear on a video about why speech language is important. Leah will take it to the speech therapist conferences. It will say, this work is by Samuel Brackett and Leah.
Sam is a young man with Down syndrome. His mum arranged for me to work with him online for 12 sessions to ensure that he received the direct individualised speech and language therapy specified in his EHCP. This took place alongside group speech and language therapy in his Key Stage 5 FE setting and group sessions for young people with Down syndrome offered by a local Down syndrome support network. Alongside vocabulary and inferencing, we also focused on verbal reasoning, which soon became conversations about Sam's future. Sam talked about his aspirations, carrying out research and working in hospitals and laboratories, inspired by his passion for a TV show set in a hospital. My own perspective is as both a speech and language therapist and a parent of a 12-year-old with Down syndrome and autism. I respond to calls for research participants to complete questionnaires and interviews as a parent of a child with Down syndrome, as a parent of an autistic child, and as a parent of a child with an EHCP. Contributing to this work feels meaningful, supporting service improvement and social change, and it also helps me to understand and cope with challenging life experiences. Next slide. Our project addressed several aims and speech and language therapy goals. Verbal reasoning, about present actions connecting to future dreams, supporting the realisation of personal aspirations, and contributing to co-production and research. Sam linked his dream jobs to his favourite TV show and talked about both as though they were real life, while his family and practitioners viewed the show as fiction and his plans as dreams that were unlikely to be realised. Sam's descriptions of his current activities and achievements were considered accurate and valid, and he spoke about his dream job scenarios, such as conducting life-saving lab work and being a DNA researcher, as plans that he will realise in the future. Sam was not receptive to talking about fact and fiction, dreams and reality, but he was keen on making plans that he could connect with his present self. Next slide. Sam told me he wants to do serious work, something important that really matters. And after mentioning hospital roles, he talked about making a horror film that excites his friends, I believe referencing Otto Baxter, who has Down syndrome and made the BAFTA-winning film Not an Effing Horror Story. As Sam reached beyond hospital roles, I suggested advocacy, and Sam talked about being an award-winning advocate. Next slide. We talked about the value of Sam's lived experience and that it's important to hear what he thinks. I told Sam that speech and language therapists need to hear from people who have speech and language therapy about what they think so that we can get it right. I told Sam that exploring this together is doing research. I prepared an opener. I showed this photo of a parent with her young child who has Down syndrome from a newspaper article. I asked Sam how he would respond to the parent's question, is it a good idea to go to speech therapy? I explained that I could send our project to the online speech and language therapy conference, and Sam agreed to this. In this project, Sam defined a new role for himself, an online advocate who is standing up for little children who go to hospital. Next slide. We worked collaboratively to document Sam's ideas. I presented an opener and relayed Sam's responses, which he confirmed, clarified and developed. I wrote down his ideas in a Word document that we shared on screen. Together, we reviewed, added to and refined this over several sessions. We share some of our recording on the following slides. As we were preparing for the conference, we weren't talking about an imagined future role for Sam. We were actively making it happen, giving the work purpose and value in a real context. Next slide, video 2.
I want to do an important job, something that really matters, serious work.
Sam told Leela he wants to be an award-winning advocate. Sam showed Leela 2 certificates of achievement. An advocate does lots of things over a long time. Advocates cheer people on, they stand up for people.
Advocate needs to be prepared like for a war. Advocate should wear a badge. Sam is an online advocate who is standing up for little children who go to hospitals for speech therapy.
Sam used his vocabulary strengths to share ideas. For example, listing tanks and rocket launchers and armoured vehicles when we spoke about advocacy. I repeated these back to him to check my understanding, and he confirmed that he meant being prepared like for a war. He told me about the award-winning status by saying, get medals and a cup and a trophy and awards. Next slide. We collated what Sam would say to the parent who asked about going to speech and language therapy with her child who has Down syndrome. He described the routines of attending at Blanks level 3. Next slide. I pushed on to explore reasoning and justification at Blanks level 4. Sam said they should go because they have an appointment and also mentioned protecting the child. Sam proposed questions about practical arrangements rather than asking about activities and potential benefits. Next slide. He reflected on his current and past speech therapy, and feelings were important in this, as well as addressing the need to speak clear. He said, I love going to speech therapy because it makes me feel excited. I need to speak clear. How I get there is speech therapy. Next slide. He talked about what we were doing, mentioning disability and making plans for the future. Next slide. To conclude, I have 4 points to discuss. Firstly, learning from Sam's lived experience, which aligns to key features of speech and language therapy. When he says it's about disability, I think this reflects our practice of assessment and goal setting relating to challenges experienced in real life. When he talks about doing things in life and relationships, I think we're getting to functionally orientated. He says he needs to speak clear. He has a purpose and defines the outcomes of speech and language therapy. And he talks about practicing difficult words relating to specific activities we might do in speech and language therapy. Sam's views on why do speech and language therapy were very straightforward. It's fun for kids and it's part of parenting. I set out to explore from Sam's perspective as a person of Down syndrome, but Sam related it to going to hospital for speech therapy and did not want to mention Down syndrome in this context, while he comfortably identifies as having Down syndrome in other conversations. Next slide. Sam used the present tense to talk about realising his future. There are many examples of people with Down syndrome doing this. Miguel Tomazin, a singer and drummer with Down syndrome, led the internationally renowned Argentinian band Reynolds for 20 years. When he first met the musicians who went on to form the band with him, they say he had never touched a drum kit before, but he introduced himself saying, "Hi, I'm Miguel, a great famous drummer." Charlie French is an abstract artist with Down syndrome working from his studio in the United States and selling his artwork commercially. Some years ago, while starting to recover from a period of disengagement and Down syndrome regression disorder, he told his parents, "I am an artist. It's called Art for Dollars," and that was the beginning of his art career. Similarly, rather than talking about aspirations and planning, it was more effective to talk about future Sam in the world and then work together to manifest that version of himself. Next slide. Exploring Exploring advocacy provided a motivating context to have conversations, making sense of Sam's experiences and perspectives on speech and language therapy. Next slide. Video 3.
Advocate is a word. Okay, the advocate is just rewarding, you just look at find stuff in research could do, or maybe do some more reasoning for some making up with the levels when you can.
Okay. So as an advocate, you're looking and finding and doing some research
Yeah.
and raising up the level.
Yes.
Research and advocacy provided concrete activities through which Sam could realise his aspiration for an important role, drawing on his lived experiences rather than specific skills required for the other research roles he mentioned. It could be valuable to critically examine the terms that might be used talking about becoming an advocate. People with learning disabilities may be familiar with non-disabled advocates speaking up on their behalf. Self-advocacy is a term commonly used by activist researchers of groups with people with learning disabilities, referring to actions not taken for oneself, but for one's community. Next slide. We discussed research and advocacy as intertwined, but the Digging Deeper article by advocate researchers points out the differences in advocate and researcher roles. The term activist and campaigner may also be empowering. Walmsley et al. Call for research which can be used by people with intellectual disabilities to campaign for change on behalf of others. Next slide. The SHAPE Research Change Lives project used co-production to identify priorities for research with the Down syndrome community, with contributions from advisory groups of people with and without Down syndrome and the other genetic conditions investigated. The project recommendations call for partnerships between representatives of these communities and researchers during the whole research life cycle, from deciding how to approach the research question, how to best elicit the required information or data, and for translation of research into practice. Next slide. We operationalise co-production through facilitated conversations and recording, rather than a prompt and response, question and answer, interview or structured questionnaire. Using this method, Sam's perspectives negated my initial assumption that the focus would centre on Down syndrome and the rationale behind speech and language therapy. Instead, Sam described himself as an advocate for little children who go to hospital for speech therapy. He described processes and feelings and outcomes of going to speech therapy, rather than underlying rationales, such as the syndrome-specific profile of impairment that we might focus on as professionals. Single case study conversations may offer greater insight than question and answer formats, involving people with Down syndrome as co-researchers rather than research subject, reflecting Walmsley et al.'s writing and practice of co-production and with co-researchers with intellectual disabilities. This approach has the potential to involve a wider cohort of people with Down syndrome than semi-structured interviews or questionnaires, being less dependent on verbal language and accommodating deviations from a preconceived structure. Thank you.
Leila, thank you so much. And I know I speak for everyone on the session when I say we'd like you to take back to Sam just how impressed we are with the work he's already doing as an advocate. It reminds me of, I had the good fortune to attend the United Nations Disability Conference session once, where both the chair of the global session and all of the speakers were people with Down syndrome. And it was one of the most effective disability sessions I've ever had the honour to attend. Thank you so much, everybody. I think those three different perspectives fit the brief of new developments in co-production. You are being fairly shy with your questions at the moment, but let's begin by going back to the, I need to get it in the right order, the tell, the throw and the catch, which, as I suspected, Kirsten, a lot of love for that model in the chat. I know you've already had a wee look at the questions, but just for everyone present, the issue of a shareable visual that's available, because I'm aware that it's a copyright material that you've done at Stammer, but also people have asked to talk through and it's interesting how people are very focused on the visual, how the visual representation was developed.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. So when we we read all this research and we're talking for months, and we'd written this massive 80-page document trying to do all this together, and then we were sat down in our working group a little bit head in hands, like what do we pull out of all of that? Often it's like the deeper you look into something, the more complicated it gets. So then we went off and we decided all four people would go off and do a mind map, and then we'd see was there anything kind of coming out of that mind map. And one of the people in the working group had in the very corner of their mind map had done a little doodle of someone throwing a ball, and it was just we also went, oh, that's it. That's the sort of, how do we take all this complexity and make it into something we can use? So we all got really excited. It just resonated immediately when we saw this little doodle. So it kind of came from there. And it's with that the doodle then led to the development of the framework. But we're very fortunate that one of the working group members just happens to be an artist as part of their, she's incredibly multi-talented. She's called Clara Byrne, and she's amazing. But one of her many talents is she's an artist. So she was like, let me go away and play with these. So she did. So the images you see, they are Clara's work. And we have tweeted them in the group. So one of the pictures on the throw, the one where the people are passing the ball, an earlier version, we all decided it looked like the ball had died and the two people were kind of commiserating over the ball. So there have been tweaks along the way to try to, represent those concepts visually as kind of as accurately as possible. But it really is Clara's work in kind of bringing that framework to life. And when we do present, so we do we often do a sort of 1 hour session where we have a bit more time looking at some of the examples and things, but it's always the visuals that people get. And we absolutely have examples of speech and language therapists who, they just take the picture of the three things and they will go and talk to people, and just having that, being a useful sort of focus for a conversation around it. So yeah, yay for Clara, and we're very lucky to have her as part of the group.
Kirsten, in terms of the shareable visual, people have already picked up, and you said yourself that the model is usable way beyond Stammer. But I guess people will want to know, is it free to use? Is it something that you need to ask Stammer's permission? Are you going to sell it?
Yeah, so it's free to use. If there's any opportunity to sell it, we want to sell it. So you're not allowed to sell it. So you're allowed to use it. You're not allowed to sell it or nick it and do it better. It's that's not fair. So don't nick it, do it better, and then sell it. But it's free for SLTs to use. So you can take things like the slide deck and take the pictures from that and use it. You're really, really welcome to. At some point, we'd quite like to put it into book form or something, but that's a way down way down the road yet. But yeah, so very welcome to use it in practical, constructive ways and in discussions around disclosure. We would love that. Make us really, really happy if it goes out in the world and does some good.
Brilliant, thank you. There's a bunch of questions relating to Sam and Leila. You may not feel it's appropriate to speak on Sam's behalf, but I think we could characterise them by people saying, well, insofar as you feel it's right for you to share, where's Sam going next? Where does his advocacy career take him, and what are his plans? But I think there's also a question saying, well, what he had to say, his insights deserve to be heard more widely, and is there any plan for that to happen?
Yes, absolutely. I think this is the beginning of a career for Sam that isn't focused on Chicago Med and doing lab work. And this has been the first step. He won't mind me sharing, he's at Orpheus College now and he's on the drama majors. But I think this is his first act as an advocate. And we've talked about, me and him have talked about in the support group, that he might support families who are taking their children with Down syndrome to hospital for blood tests. And the next step might be a role talking to those children and reassuring them. But I think now the concept is planted, there are endless opportunities, and that really wasn't the case when he said, I want to be a DNA researcher and work in a lab.
Thank you. Someone's just been asking about the continuing social stigma around intellectual disabilities that can be faced, and whether you've got any advice or based on experience of tackling the stigma amongst others about what people with intellectual disabilities can achieve.
Well, I threw into the presentation about Otto Baxter, Miguel Thomasine and Charlie French. And I think just hearing people with Down syndrome referred to by their first name and surname and their achievements in the world, and they're internationally renowned artists, for me is a really easy first step.
Brilliant, thank you. Let's turn to Joanna and to the NCA team. Somebody made a point about the mum-dad thing, and that struck me actually. If I think about experiences I had with my own late mother, and sometimes I'd be going, "She had a name," So that one certainly rang true for me. But the people have been asking, particularly about embedding co-production principles in the school context, and also just as a question saying, what's made the biggest impact?
So I can answer on the schools one. I would say very openly that's a ongoing working project that we are sort of trying to work towards. Obviously, when the therapist in school, contacting parents and having those discussions with parents is more difficult. Currently, what we're in the process of doing is using some surveys and setting up some times within schools for parents to be able to come and talk to therapists to get kind of feedback from them about how they would like to see that co-production moving forward. Because what we don't want to do is make that decision for parents and say this will be the best way to do it, and then for parents and carers to say actually that's not helpful. We've made little steps forward in terms of that kind of, we let them know when they've been seen. We have, like we said on the presentation, we've an open phone line that can contact us, and they've got our contact details. But I would say it's in the early stages of, and once we've done these sort of surveys and sort of focus groups with parents, we will sort of have a bit more of a direction about where to go next with that. So
I can come in on the biggest impact. I think it's been around the just mentality shift in the team to focusing on what's actually going to make the difference for the family and the child right now. So in the past, we may have had a child come in, we might have done a language assessment and picks up, oh, they're struggling with joining words together, let's work on and. Now we're just having that really open discussion with the family at first point of contact about what is actually something that you want to work towards and how can we get there. So it might be something like the child is struggling to tell the parent about their day at school. So do we do a piece of work around narrative to help them work on that specific goal, and just making it really personal to something meaningful for the family. And with just having that mentality shift in the team has made a massive impact, I think.
And I think, sorry, Derek, just to quickly say, from a sort of for the children who aren't already on the specialist caseload, having that easy access to the service means we've had a lot more direct contact with health visitors, school staff, parents who haven't had a referral into the service but are wondering about whether they need one, if there's things they can do. And we've actually, because we've had that more open line to people who aren't on the caseload, A, it's been very helpful for those people we've contacted, but B, we've seen a massive reduction in our waiting lists, and we've been able to provide more support at that targeted level. And actually, sometimes that's been enough to do the job rather than needing to have a referral to come in before they can have that conversation. So from a sort of more service management side of things, that's been probably the biggest impact as well.
Yeah, at its worst point, our waiting list was over a year and it's now standing around 10 weeks. So we've done a huge piece of work across the whole system. Like Lucy said, being present at the universal and targeted levels as well as the specialist level, and being accessible to families makes a huge difference, I think. don't know if you want to add anything, Jo.
I'm just sat here smiling because I so love hearing you talk about the the work that you've done and the impact that the working together has had. I think one of the things that has and I'm putting words in your mouth a little bit here, but the things that you've told me is that actually hearing the lived experience, but in a really practical, solution focused kind of a way, has helped the whole team, because we trained the whole team. It wasn't just a couple of people, so everybody was there. And I think that has helped to embed things, because everybody's heard the stories and heard the evidence around what it's like as a parent carer. But I think one of the things also that was mentioned was about kind of the simple things and key takeaways. And as a parent, that question about the working with parents through school, what I appreciate the most when I'm navigating these really complex systems, which are very complex, and there's lots of different things, is when people meet me and bring their humanity and see mine. And I think sometimes we find ourselves in conflicted positions, and everybody's got a lot of work to do. Everybody's under a lot of pressure. And I think if I was to say one takeaway from a parent point of view in terms of working well with parents in schools or in services or wherever, find and understand us as humans, find out how you and connect with us, and think below the surface as to, if we come and we're particularly snappy one day, that doesn't say anything about you. It says more about what we're bringing that day, and that maybe just understand that a little bit. And as you've rightly said, particularly if you're with us a lot of the time, find out and routinely use our preferred name. My daughter's social worker, who's known me a year, introduced me in a meeting as Mum the other day, and it just really feels devaluing. So, and I think for people, like in the speech and language, often we're seeing people, at least for a little while, even if it's just a couple of weeks, it's worth making a note of and using somebody's name. It brings us in as part of the team, makes us feel valued.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Joanna. We are rapidly running out of time. I'll take one more if you can do it, but you've literally got a minute. It's about the co-produced survey with children and just how you did that. Can somebody, we can answer more extensively after, but can you do that in 1 minute?
Very quickly, there was a focus group held with children about what sort of things are important to them about speech and language therapy, to help us to narrow down some of the questions. And we then put together, this was a wider piece of work within the NCA, but they put together a survey with more friendly language, pictures and stuff, and then trialed that with children of different ages, got their feedback and then refined it. So, but happy to answer more questions about that separately.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you to everyone who's attended the session today. Thank you to everyone who's presented today. I think this was just what we were hoping for in terms of opening these new developments, because it's one thing to say we're committed to co-production. It's another way to think about, okay, well, what does that mean in practice, and where does it take us in these different fields? Lilo, I know you'll give our thanks to Sam for his invaluable contribution to today's session. As I said at the start, I don't know if points mean prizes, but points mean something. And I'm required to remind you that if you leave feedback, not only will that be a good thing, because it will close the feedback loop, it will also gain you points. You'll also shortly have a secret code, secret in the sense that it's going to be displayed on screen for everybody to see, which will also win you points. So I hope that is a thrill for you. But thank you for attending the co-production session today. I look forward to seeing some of you at further sessions through the conference. Good morning.